The point of an empire, any empire in our world, is to expand its borders so that the heirs of its glorious leader have a vast inheritance upon their demise. A king's throne is as secure as his succession, and that goes twice for emperors who don't usurp their power from republics. So was the case for the Viltrumite Empire as well, except for many millennia, they had no idea what the heirs of the empire were. That is what allowed Thrag to eventually take over the planet and institute his ideal of militant purism. But the fact of the matter is, the first emperor's bloodline survives through the most unexpected of Viltrumites. In this video, we'll take a detailed look at the royal bloodline of the Viltrumite Empire and how Mark Grayson, of all people, fits into it. So, without further ado, strap on your spoiler hats because this one's going to get messy.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
The man who turned Viltrum into an empire, Argal the Great. The Viltrumites, as a species, have endured for thousands of years in the furthest reaches of space. Their civilization emerged on a planet that has 1.5 times Earth's gravity, and they evolved in such a way that they developed godlike superpowers. This, coupled with their generally combative nature, threatened to tear Viltrumite culture apart from within, but one man managed to prevent that from happening. That man was Argal, the first and longest reigning emperor in Viltrumite history. Argal was not the strongest member of his race, but he was the wisest, and he saw the futility of Viltrumites fighting each other. He realized just how genetically blessed his species was, and he knew that they technically had access to unbounded potential. So, instead of turning it on their own people, Argal organized Viltrumites into using their strength against each other. Weaker alien species. He turned the Viltrumites into a species of savage conquerors, and because he prevented them from genociding their own race, he was revered as a godlike figure. Argal oversaw 5,000 years of expansion, during which the Viltrumites subjugated several planets and their races, setting up entire systems for conquering worlds. He garnered so much hatred outside of his home that when he had children, he had to thoroughly conceal their identities, seeing as his enemies would make frequent attempts at his and their lives. Argal also bred Thrag to become the strongest member of his species. He was trained and biogenetically augmented since birth, and over time, Thrag became one of Argal's most trusted weapons. He was going strong in the 5th millennium of his reign when the unexpected happened. Argal was betrayed and assassinated by one of his own. Throughout his entire life, he had worked hard to promote Viltrumite unity by turning their discrimination towards other races. He wanted nothing more than for his people to prosper, but in doing so, he also didn't give much thought to the destruction he was spreading throughout the universe, and after several centuries of enduring his tyranny, one man stepped forward and took the responsibility of ending his reign. That man was the founder of the Coalition of Planets, Thetis, who probably used Ragnar Bone to stab a dagger deep into Argal's skull. He escaped and established a resistance to the Viltrumite Empire immediately after, and Argal's assassination sent Viltrum spiraling into chaos. A brutal civil war broke out that saw Argal's personal weapon emerge as his replacement. Thrall encouraged a might makes right mentality amongst his people and gathered up the survivors of the civil war to create a new era of Viltrumite dominance. Among his first followers were Craig and Conquest, two of the oldest members of their race who lived when Argal was still reigning. Once Thrag had secured his power with his strength, he got himself elected Grand Regent of the Viltrum Empire. He openly declared that he would begin searching for their beloved late leader's heirs earnestly, and for that time, he did exactly that. Though Argal had sent their children into hiding, he maintained records of their names, current identities, biometrics, the whole shebang. This was done to ensure that in case he needed to call upon a prince or princess of the empire, he could do so without tearing his own hair out. But when civil war broke out in the aftermath of his death, those records ended up getting destroyed. In fact, we wouldn't be surprised if it was revealed that Thrag had something to do with it because he got comfortable with ruling as acting emperor way too quickly. And when the Scourge virus hit, he abandoned the search for Argyle's heirs altogether. He became obsessed with inheriting Argyle's legacy and convinced the around 50 remaining Viltrumites that he was doing everything he could to locate the same. Thrag came up with the idea to spread misinformation regarding the Viltrumites' current population strength to discourage rebellion, and his great hope was to find the betrayer of their race so he could avenge Argyle personally. He managed to do that, but in the process, he also stumbled across his liege's heir, the long-lost heir of the Empire. How Nolan's heritage was discovered. It was revealed in Chapter 102 that Nolan Grayson is the biological son of Emperor Argyle. Turns out he was one of the kids that Argyle had removed from the capital to safeguard their lives. Nolan's caretaker is never referenced, neither are we given any details about his youth. All we know is that he grew up in a post-Thrag society and he was one of the handful of Viltrumites to survive the Scourge. Thrag himself never suspected Nolan's heritage until his son was hit with an advanced version of the virus and brought to the Viltrumites for aid. The scientist that was looking into his genome discovered his connection to Argyle and brought the information to Thrag immediately. Then instead of being relieved, he killed the scientist. It's quite possible that the skull that he kept as a reminder of Argyle ended up working against him if the scientist used it as a basis for his DNA tests. But Thrag was past caring. He left to assassinate Nolan despite striking a peace treaty with him because he was enraged by the emergence of Argyle's bloodline at such a crucial point in Viltrumite history. When Thrag discovered Nolan's parentage, he was hiding out on Earth with all the remaining Viltrumites, seeing as the coalition of planets had destroyed their home. He managed to kill Thetis, but the cost of killing Nolan and Mark would have been the extinction of his race. Thrag instead chose to pull Skrully and relocated all Viltrumites to Earth, where he told them to breed as much as possible. He even helped Mark defend the planet a couple of times to keep his own agendas alive. But as soon as he realized that Nolan was Argyle's son, he forgot all his spiel about keeping his race alive because his own power was now being threatened. Thrag knew that as soon as word spread that Nolan was Argyle's son, he'd be deposed, and he earned his command, damn it. When he found out the truth, Nolan was living on a Guardian's base on the moon, so killing him would have left no major witnesses. He ended up toying around with him too much, and in the end, Anissa, Craig, and a few other Viltrumites discovered the truth as well. They pledged their allegiance to Nolan instantly and helped him beat Thrag into imprisonment. Nolan didn't feel like he was ready for the responsibility in front of him, but he took it up anyway, and he did his best to steer his people away from a life of bloodshed and violence. Luckily for him, many Viltrumites were already on that path, so he didn't have to convince them to follow his lead, but he did have to convince them to let Thrag go. As Emperor, Nolan wanted to set a precedent of mercy, so he decided to let Thrag live in permanent exile. He acknowledged the fact that he was most likely making a mistake, but that's kind of the point of setting an example. Treason is punishable by death, according to Viltrumite custom, and Thrag had been betraying his empire for over a millennia. But by letting him live, Nolan cemented this idea that the harshest race in the universe could be merciful as well. Sure, he made mistakes while ruling as emperor, like siding with a maniacal mass murderer just to ensure his people's safety, but under him, the Viltrumites did become a lot more compassionate and ultimately a force for good. Nolan ruled wisely and justly, and he never compromised the safety of his people. He also never struck out against another race, prioritizing the safety and survival of his own. He knew that there were many things out there that can kill a Viltrumite, and he personally shared most of them with their recent former enemies, the Coalition of Planets. He needed to be sure that whatever he'd accomplished through his life on Earth didn't go to waste, but ultimately, he did as good of a job as he could have done, given the circumstances. His first act as emperor led to his last breath, because Thrag took his revenge in rather a violent fashion, but Nolan at least got to tell his son Mark that he loved him one last time. And speaking of Mark being the eldest son of the emperor, he was first in line to the throne of Viltrum, which he assumed after a period of great reluctance and reflection. The third emperor of the Viltrumites, Mark Grayson's time as emperor. Mark started the series as this naive, wide-eyed kid who had pure ideals and ideas about what a hero should be, but throughout his journey in Invincible, he comes to realize that he is no hero at all. He's just Mark, a man who does his best to do the right thing and sometimes that involves eliminating threats permanently. Mercy is a gift that only those willing to honor deserve. And Mark isn't the kind to go in swinging with lethal force upon first contact. He practices what he preaches as much as he can, and he never quite gives up until he recognizes that there's no other choice. All these qualities make him an emperor whose legacy succeeds that all his predecessors. It's through him that we realize the truth about Argyle's heirs, so we think he deserves the good ending that the comics gave him. After leaving Immortal in charge of Earth's safety, Mark takes the Viltrumites on an eternal peregrination through the universe. They fight to defend and liberate planets from other intergalactic conquerors, and he even goes up against the coalition of planets, just to do what's right. Mark's rescue operations were making members leave the coalition, and Alan the alien was forced to attack him to preserve their interests. Once the Viltrumites easily defeated their armies, including Battle Beast's daughter, the coalition pretty much disbanded, and the Viltrumites brought peace to much of the universe. They became conservationists, galactic refugee helpers and protectors of the weakest among them. They never took another planet for their own and chose to spare all those who provoked them. Mark Grayson replaced the warlike red and white heraldry of his empire to the blue, yellow, and white of his invincible suit, because to him, that represented growth and progress. He also chose to not sport a mustache, discontinuing the tradition as a bygone from an era best forgotten. He became stronger than Thrag and wiser than Argyle, and unlike his grandfather, who had no shortage of publicly acknowledged heirs. All heirs to the Viltrum throne, Oliver, Terra, Marky, and more. Mark Grayson was the first and eldest son of Nolan Grayson, but he wasn't his only child. When Nolan left Earth following his battle with his son, he ended up conquering Thraxa, hoping to placate Thrag's wrath with their obedience. He also fell in love with a native Thraxan and gave birth to the first known Viltrumite Thraxan hybrid, whom he named Oliver. Oliver Grayson died before his half-brother became emperor, so there was no chance of any conflict over there. But he did leave behind 2 children who are part of the royal lineage. Their claims to the throne are secondary in comparison to one boasted by Mark's future children, Terra Grayson and Marcus Murphy, aka Marky. Terra is Mark's official daughter and heiress, who was born from a union between Mark and Eve, and when they became the rulers of the Viltrumites, Terra became their princess. She had a princess attitude growing up, but once she came into her own, Terra became a conservationist first and foremost. She traveled from planet to planet, fixing their problems, innovating solutions, and defying her father occasionally, like any growing girl would. Terra eventually became an official member of the Conservationist Committee, and she was shocked by the war between her dad's army and the coalition of planets because she did not expect the organization she idolized so much to attack Viltrumites first. Her department was thinking of breaking away of the Empire for a bit, but her friend Ursal, who was one of Thrag's many hybrid daughters, convinced her otherwise. Terra eventually became her dad's champion in trials by combat and will presumably further the new Viltrumite legacy of being the defenders of peace. In case something unfortunate happens to her, Mark has a Jon Snow in a chamber as well. At one point in his life, he was violently assaulted by the pure-blooded Viltrumite Anissa. Anissa thought she was just following her people's tradition of taking what they liked by force, and it was only several years later that she became repentant for her heinous act. She initially refused to mate with any human as part of Thrag's plan to repopulate their species, and chose Mark because he was such a strong man. It was only after giving birth to his son and finding love for herself that Anissa realized the true gravity of her crimes. She ended up having more children with a human that she married, but her son by Mark is the one that's relevant to this video. She decided to name him Marcus after his dad and gave him the nickname Marky. Anissa learned to become human like so many other members of her race, and after her death, Mark visited Marky for the first time. He explained to him his lineage, much like Nolan once broke it down for him, and Marky ended up becoming the new Invincible on Earth. He fought Mark when he returned to the planet several years later, being frustrated with his absence and feeling abandoned. But Mark told him that they could heal all wounds through the everlasting concept of time. From that moment forward, Marky became his Earth proxy, while Terra became invincible to the rest of the universe. Now, there are 4 prospective claimants to his throne, and the first in line is perhaps going to be even better than him. And for the first time in Viltrumite history, no one has to worry about the succession. By the end of the series, Argyle's bloodline will instill true wisdom within his people and undo the centuries of violent numbness that Grand Regent Thrag kept them in. And that is honestly as good as it gets. Marvel's verdict. Speaking of good stuff, all good things must come to an end, just like this video. We hope you've enjoyed discovering the truth about the missing Viltrumite royal family, and we'd love to know what you think about it. Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Invincible content. We'll see you guys in the next one, so take care, and beware of the man in the sky, because, well, not all of them are good after all.